As far as your journals go, I don't think we're going to have time to work with them today, so do keep them and bring them to class on Wednesday, because we'll work further with them on Wednesday. Okay, so we are live with the poetry essay. Now make sure that if you're watching this in class today, or if you're watching it online, that you check the due dates on your own assignment. But this is the poetry essay assignment. Important due dates on the 15th of February. I can't believe we're almost February. The introduction, thesis, and paper outline is due in Canvas by the start of class, or if you're watching online, you will need to go by the due date on there. I think it's midnight. For those of you in the brick and mortar class, write a little note by this, that you'll need to print this out and bring it to class, because we'll be doing some workshop activities with it on the 15th. Okay, so make sure that you print out your introduction, thesis, and outline. What does this contain? It's the first paragraph of your essay plus the outline of the body. Okay, as the basic composition of what you're going to be turning in here. So you'll turn it in on Canvas, and you'll also print that out and bring it to class. Okay, so you won't be able to have any handwritten drafts since you can't turn that into Canvas. Then the final draft is due in Canvas by 11:59 p.m. on the 20th. The reason that the intro and outline is due on the 15th and the final draft is on the 20th is it gives me time to put comments on your introduction and outline to give your paper a little direction before it's due. Questions on the due dates? All righty. Poetry explication, this is what we're going to be doing for this paper. Your textbook defines a poetry explication as a detailed analysis of a work of literature, often word by word and line by line, or a close reading. Your book also has a detailed explanation for writing an explication on pages 562 to 563. However, these definitions can essentially be boiled down to an answer to a simple question. What does this poem mean? What does it mean? What is this poem trying to get at? What does the author want us to see? What does the speaker want us to see? What is the overall impact of this poem? Okay. For this assignment, write a 1,350 to 1,700 word essay. If you go over, it's fine, in which you construct an argument that discusses what the poem means. Now you can use any poem from the textbook for this, but 1,350 words is 4.5 to 5 pages. So, are you going to be able to pick a 4 or 5 line poem for this? Probably not. You're going to have to pick a poem that has a little bit more weight to it. I would say shoot for at least 20 lines, maybe longer, because you need to give yourself something to talk about. Your discussion, in addition to analyzing the meaning of the poem at length, should use the vocabulary from the literary term sheet, imagery, metaphor, simile, theme, and other literary devices. But as I mentioned in this class before I turned on the video, but I also want to mention for the online class, remember that the literary terms are a vocabulary for discussing literature. They're not a checklist. You wouldn't want to just identify literary terms. You want to use the literary terms to illustrate something about the meaning, okay? Because every poem is going to have some sort of image. Most of them are going to have stanzas or meter or assonance or consonants or something like that. But if it doesn't affect what the poem means, it really doesn't belong in your paper. All right, questions before I move on? All right. Now, as you look at the poem, consider what tools the author uses to create meaning in the poem. Start with the steps on 540 to 541, which I've also included in the assignment sheet for you guys, to help you get a general understanding of the poem. One of the things you may want to consider is the manner in which the speaker shows you the meaning of the poem. So sometimes the speaker is going to be an integral part of that poem. At others, the speaker is almost omniscient, like it's a camera looking down on whatever the subject of the poem is. But it may be important or critical to the meaning of the poem. What images are present in the poem that affect the way we view the message that the poem is trying to convey? Most good poetry starts with imagery. If there isn't a good image, it's hard to create meaning in our minds because there's no picture in our minds. Is there an overriding or extended metaphor in the poem? If so, what? Is the entire thing a metaphor for something else? And this is also related, an extended metaphor is related to an allusion or an analogy, sorry, or even an allegory. These are big fancy words for something referring to something else. I'll give you an example. Many of you have probably either read the books or at least heard the movies of the Lord of the Rings series. Fellowship of the Ring, Twin Towers, Return of the King. Well, these books were started during the First World War and finished after the Second World War. It's not an accident that the good guys, just like our perception of the Second World War, come from the West. It's that evil in the East, the Germans, to a lesser extent the Soviets, Japanese, all considered east of the good guys. The men of the West have to come together to conquer evil. So this would be an extended metaphor, an allegory to the 2 world wars. That's what the type of thing an extended metaphor is. So maybe the whole poem might be referring to a butterfly or be talking about a butterfly, but it's clearly referring to something else. Okay? Maybe it's chaos theory or something like that, you know, where a butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazon and it causes a hurricane across the world. You know, whatever it might be. But look for an extended message throughout the poem, because more often than not, poems examine a single idea at length. And the next question kind of goes with that. Is the poem allegorical? If so, to what? Famous tween or kids children's book series starts with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Well, clearly, the character Aslan is an allegory for the Christian story. He makes a sacrifice, he's tortured, he's essentially crucified, he comes back from the dead, better than ever, and solves all the world's problems at the end of the story. Clearly, this is an allegory to the Christian story. It's just with lions and kids and Turkish delight and all that sort of stuff. And Turkish delight, by the way, is a chocolate. It's not like, I don't know, a piece of a Turk. It might be a little gamey. Anywho, how does the form of the poem affect its meaning? Sometimes the form of the poem emphasizes certain words or ideas at the end of lines in order to create more meaning. How does the social atmosphere in which the poem was written affect it? Now, not every poem is going to lend itself to biographical information of the author or looking at an event in which it was written about, but some poems will, okay? So sometimes the social context makes a difference. It's not an accident that Thomas Hardy's poem that we looked at for the poetry PowerPoint was written right after the Boer War in South Africa, which was a very bloody war between the English and the Dutch, the white tribe of Africa that had lived in South Africa for a couple hundred years. They're called the white tribe of Africa because by that point even their language had developed so much from the Dutch. It's called Afrikaans. It became a separate language. Okay, so Hardy may be inspired by those events. Okay, now I don't want you to just answer these questions and call it an essay, but carefully read the poem and discover for yourself what the poem means. Whatever you choose to focus on in this essay, remember to create an argument in your thesis and support that argument throughout the essay with evidence from the poem and secondary sources. Remember, this isn't a summary of the poem. This is an argument about what the poem means, and your thesis needs to reflect that. Your thesis needs to give you something to prove throughout the course of the essay. And if you need a refresher on what a good thesis should do, there is a PowerPoint on Canvas about thesis statements. But generally speaking, a good thesis should stand on the issue, should be arguable. It should contain a subject plus significance. Subject for this essay would be the poem, the significance, what you're going to argue about the meaning. And it answers the so what question. What's the so what question? You've had me before, you've heard this, but you don't want your reader to get to the end of your essay and say, well, so what? You know, they said that this poem that's called Polka Dotted Butterflies is about polka dotted butterflies. Okay, and so in other words, you need to just set yourself up to give yourself something to prove throughout the course of the essay. And if you do that, you should answer the so what question. Okay, questions on that? You know, kind of pump primer questions that I have here. It's not a checklist, it's just some ideas to get you to your brainstorming. Okay, fantastic. Now, please use at least 3 secondary sources to support your thesis, and I want to make this clear. You can use the dictionary as a source, but it won't count in that minimum 3, okay? The dictionary is kind of a cop-out source. I'm not saying you can't use it. Of course you can use it, but it doesn't count as one of your secondary sources, okay? You'll also be asked to have a works cited listing the poem and your secondary sources. Your essay should be written in the third person. Your essay should be written in the third person. No, I think, I believe, I feel, you know, I think this poem means, write it in the third person. It's going to be stronger. And you should completely use the second person, you, your, y'all. Using the second person results in a D on your grammar and mechanics grade, automatically. The rest of the paper could be picture perfect as far as grammar and mechanics goes. Use second person once, goes down to a D. Eliminate it from your essay, okay? Let's see. Please note, assume that your reader has read the poem, so please do not write a book report essay where you just summarize the poem. For an article on the difference between summary and analysis, there's a web link there. There's also, that particular document is on Canvas. And we're going to talk probably Wednesday about the difference between summary and analysis. All right, any questions about what we're being asked to do here? Okay, just a few of the requirements. Begin with an interesting and informative title. Have a clear and concise claim. You need to make an argument about what the poem means. In other words, you state your stand on the issue, what you think the poem means, and then you use the text of the poem and your sources to help prove that point. You should offer a variety of reasons to support your claim. Use evidence from the text to support your claim. You probably shouldn't be using 2, but in case you are. Use 3 secondary sources. Diction and style appropriate to a formal essay. This means avoiding slang. Conversational language. Exclamation points. In the world of texting, we love exclamation points. You get 3 in your lifetime, according to Ernest Hemingway, and I agree with him. So don't waste one of your 3 exclamation points on a text or an English 102 paper, okay? The reason I don't like exclamation points and you shouldn't use them is if your reader's not already excited about what you're saying. You can't force them to be by slapping an exclamation point at the end, okay? Now, of course, if it comes in a quote, you can use it. Needs to be free of grammatical and mechanical errors, being double-spaced and in Times New Roman 12-point font. If your essay is not formatted correctly, I'll send you a note. This is late until you format it correctly, so make sure you do so. Needs to be at least 1,350 words. Follow MLA requirements, including works cited, in-text citations, page formatting, etc. Now, as far as the formatting goes, I want your entire research project to be formatted correctly, but I'm really going to focus on that section 4. You know, in the upper left, you have your name, instructor name, class, and the date, last name and page number. In the upper right-hand corner, is it in Times New Roman, 12-point font? Does it have the right margins? All that sort of stuff that's listed on your syllabus, okay? I will put comments on your formatting on the research project, so you should have a guide for the poetry essay. All right, let's take a brief look at the rubric, and then we will be done. And actually, the rubric is slightly different. We've changed in the English department with the merger, but the ideas are exactly the same. The only two things that have changed is the transitions and conclusion. The points have been cut in half, so those will be 7.5 points each, and the grammar and mechanics will be worth 45 points, okay? But you're going to be evaluated on your introduction, how good your thesis is and how focused you are on your thesis, the construction of the body paragraphs, your organization, the content. Notice the content and grammar and mechanics are the biggest chunks of your grade, 90 points out of 150. Conclusion, and then, of course, grammar and mechanics, which your works cited and documentation stuff is included. Any final questions on the poetry essay? All right, it's pretty straightforward. It's an explication which we'll be working on both in class and on the online classes. So let me go ahead and stop the broadcast.